Bess had worked at Calver and Sons for 11 months and had never once seen the office go quiet like that. It happened the moment he stepped through the door. Not a slow settling, but an instant, complete silence, the way a room changes when a window is shut against the wind. Her supervisor, Mr. Fenn, who never looked up from his invoices, looked up. The other clerk, old Harold, set his pen down. Even the harbor noise outside seemed to recede slightly, as though the world itself were giving the man room. Bess knew the name Nikolai Voss the way everyone in the Port District knew it, not because they had seen him, but because his name moved through conversations as a given, the way the tide or the cold were given. He was the head of Voss Holdings, which meant he was the reason half the shipping contracts in the harbor existed, and the other half were careful not to cross him. He was said to be precise, patient, and absolutely without forgiveness for waste or dishonesty. He was not the sort of man who appeared in a back office above a harbor chandlery. He was not the sort of man who appeared anywhere without a reason that mattered. He was tall, dark-suited, and looked like he had not slept for a long time, though he carried it without complaint. He stood at the counter and asked, with perfect quiet, "Vera Aldous." There was a pause. Then Vera looked up from the far corner of the office. She had been working through a column of freight figures, with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything. She set her pencil down flat on the ledger. She did not stand immediately. She looked at the man in the doorway for a moment, with dark, composed eyes, and Bess would think later that it was the most controlled thing she had ever seen a person do. That delay, that single breath of choosing. Then she stood and said, "Mr. Voss," and nothing more. The child on the floor looked up. Mila was 3 years old, small and dark-haired, and had been seen sit near her mother's chair, building a tower from a set of wooden blocks Vera brought for her each morning. She was used to the office. She was quiet in it, as though she understood instinctively that her mother's work was serious, and that she was a guest. In it, she looked at the stranger, with the frank, unclouded curiosity of a child who has been raised without fear. Nikolai Voss looked at the child, and something moved across his face that Bess could not quite name. Not grief and not relief and not quite joy. Something that contained all of them, and held them just barely in check. Vera came around the long counter without hurrying. She stopped a careful distance from him and said quietly, so the whole office could hear, but so it did not feel addressed to the office. "Thought you should know she is well. She has always been well." "I know," he said. "I have been told." His voice was low and measured, but there was a roughness beneath it that Bess suspected he had not intended. "Then what brings you here, Mr. Voss?" He was quiet for a moment. "Truth," he said, "or what is left of it to offer." Vera looked at him steadily. Then she turned to Bess and said, with an ordinary courtesy that somehow made Bess want to cry, "Would you mind watching Mila for a few minutes?" And before Bess could answer, she had walked to the side door that led to the small room used for client meetings, and after the briefest pause, Nikolai Voss followed her in. Bess sat down on the low chair near Mila's blocks and listened to the harbor, and to the sound of nothing she could hear from behind that door. They were in there for 20 minutes. Bess did not know what was said. She knew only what Vera had told her once, in the plain way Vera told all important things, that her marriage had ended 3 years ago in a letter she had believed because it had contained details only someone close to Nikolai could have known. She had taken Mila and gone, because she was not the sort of woman to fight over a man who had chosen to be without her, and because she had been made to believe, that the choice had been his. She had found work. She had rebuilt. She had asked for nothing. She had raised the child in an apartment above the harbor, with good food and good books, and a great deal of steadiness, and she had not spoken Nikolai Voss's name to anyone as anything other than Mila's father, which, she told Bess once, was the only thing she had been certain of. When they came back out, Vera's face was quiet in the way it was always quiet. Eyes were different. Not weeping. Vera did not weep, or at least not where others could see, but open, in a way Bess had not seen them before, as if something that had been held very tightly had at last been set down. Nikolai Voss walked to the place where Mila sat with her wooden tower, and he crouched down to the floor. A man of his stature and reputation, in his dark suit, on the worn office linoleum. and he looked at the child at her level. Mila looked back at him, without blinking. She picked up one of her blocks and held it out to him. An offering or a test, Bess could not tell, and she suspected Mila could not have said either. He took the block. He turned it once in his large hand. He said very quietly, "Thank you." Mila said, "You have sad eyes." The room was completely still. Nikolai Voss looked at his daughter for a long moment, and the thing Bess had seen move across his face when he first noticed her returned. Except this time it did not stay below the surface. His jaw tightened, his head lowered by just an inch, and when he raised his eyes again to find Vera standing a few feet away, watching him with her arms at her sides and her face composed and her whole bearing saying, as plainly as she had said everything else today, "I am not asking you for a single thing, I am only standing here." He made a sound that was not quite a word. He stood. He looked at Vera for a long moment, with the same precision he was said to bring to every serious matter, and Bess thought, he is looking at her the way he looks at something he has been without for too long and does not intend to misread again. "I will not ask you to forget it," he said. "I will not pretend the 3 years did not happen. I will not make promises about what I can undo." Paused. "I am asking only this. Will you let me try? Not come back, not you are mine or this is owed, or here is what I have arranged. Only the plain question, with no weight behind it but his own, offered the way a man offers something when he knows he has no right to expect it. Received." Vera was quiet for a moment. She looked at her daughter, who had gone back to her tower with complete serenity, as though the ground had not just shifted under everything. "You'll have to be patient," Vera said at last. "I am not a quick forgiver." "No," he said. "I know, and she comes first, in everything." "Yes," he said. "I know that too." Something shifted in Vera's face then, not softening exactly, because Vera had never been hard, but a kind of quiet opening, a door not yet walked through, but unlocked. "Then you may come on Saturday," she said. "We go to the harbor market in the morning. Mila likes the bread stall." It was not a vow. It was not a reunion sealed with ceremony or tears. It was a bread stall on a Saturday morning, and the chance to try, offered by a woman who had been given every reason not to offer it, and received by a man who had enough sense, finally, to take it without adding to its weight. Bess slipped out through the side door a few minutes later, after Mr. Voss had gone, and Vera was back at her ledger, and Milas was asleep in her chair, her cheek on her hands. She stood in the harbor air and watched the water for a while, and she thought about what it meant to be found. Not by someone who had never lost you, but by someone who had spent 3 years understanding exactly what losing you had cost. She thought about the way the child had held out the block, and the way the man had taken it with both hands, as if it were the most valuable thing given to him in years. She thought, the most feared man in the harbor district, crouched on a linoleum floor, receiving a wooden block from a small girl with sad eyes that were his own. And she went back inside and said nothing to anyone, and understood something about the world she had not understood that morning.